Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure being here with you today. My name is Marcia Trajano, and I am here to introduce you today our second book, third book actually, but our first book in this year. That happens to be also the first book of the psychological series by Joanna DeAngelis. The book that we're going to kick off our 20 weeks together is called Jesus in Our Days. Thank you so much for being here with me today for the next few minutes. So, as I mentioned before, this book is the first one of a series of books written by the spiritual author Joanna DeAngelis. To me, it is all of them are, but they're just so powerful, so impactful. And during our meetings together, it occurs to me as a live session on Sunday. So I called in my mind the Sunday Book Club meetings. And we're just going to go chapter by chapter, unveiling, discussing the insights that those messages are contained. Jesus in Our Days is, again, another tiny book. I'm going to bring it to you here. It's just, a quarter of an inch thick. So easy, you would think, for us to look into this, but they bring chapter by chapter um, topics that we're going to discuss, and those are very current topics, and but we're going to counter or confront those topics from a what are the teachings from Jesus on that. So they range from love, tolerance, courage, insecurity, suffering, and even a sense of lack of gratitude with our lives. So, together, let us review each topic, let us meet this new viewpoint about Jesus as a teacher and those points that are brought to us by Joanna DeAngelis. And it's important to note the title of the book really it tells us the timeliness of Jesus thinking, right? It does surprise us then and continue to amaze us. And it is also interesting, as Joanna puts in the preface to the book, that his teachings do continue to impact, to even amaze the most skeptical scholars out there in the field of psychology, for example. So, Jesus has brought to us, and by us, I mean humankind, a profound understanding of our psyche. And he did this during his time on earth 2,000 years ago. And by questioning those truths that were hidden to us, he shed light to those issues. And those, I see it, those issues that were found in the recesses of our minds, right? They are through his teachings, they are brought to light and really point us to the direction that with those and how we deal with those issues, they are in many cases the cause of affliction, the cause of what our suffering is, and that, interesting enough, we hide from ourselves in our unconscious. So when we discuss Jesus in our days, we are really happy to find that in his thoughts, right? Jesus' thoughts, as I mentioned before, not any new data here, and 2 millennia later, we find that they are actually better understood by you, by me, by humanity as a whole, against the knowledge of psychology that is brought forth to us. So he brought concepts that are important, concepts that are timely, and in many cases, concepts that are quite urgent to be talked about today. So let's let's look at Jesus no longer in the cross as that crucified Jesus image that we have, that he came to save us. He leaves the cross, metaphorically speaking, and as Joanna brings this new figure, this uncrucified Jesus, we come with both of them to address chapter by chapter, and we talk about 20 chapters, so 20 challenging situations that we all face, and so together we're going to look for answers in his therapeutic teachings so that you and me can find health, peace, and happiness as part of our experience as humans, right? And the invitation is to find those as we have never been able to find before. So here's my invitation for you to come with me and explore the work and of Joanna DeAngelis now. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the next chapters. This is just a brief introduction today, but we will spend the next chapters, as you can see in the screen, going from challenges to the notion of what is reincarnation, right? And that in itself brings forth the entire teachings by Jesus as he too, right? He died from his corporeal life and then he comes back. What does it mean to us, this concept of reincarnation? Humanity, the humanity in all of us, including him. And the topics start to be very interesting from then on, which are what is the absolute and the relative notions of love, tolerance, what is honor, what is justice? My goodness, that we can take years and years just talking about what is justice, human justice relative, and the divine justice that is absolute once again. Notions of what triggers us joy and how to really live that emotion together, courage, resolve, responsibility, the idea of revolution, the idea of attachments and possessions, all that those things that torment us, those things that allow us to rest, so on and so forth. So I love the topics. As I said before, invite you to come with me on a weekly touch point for us to talk more about it. But if we start to just get a glimpse, right, it's really an introductory uh, time for us today. Just give us a glimpse of how Joanna Angeles brings Jesus in our days. So she opens the book, the specific the preface to the book. And remember, this was published in 1989, so we're going on 33 years later, and we find it so fresh still. So 33 years later for something referencing 2,000 years before. Go figures, right? But she introduces Jesus as this therapist, right? As a psychotherapist, as a therapist of our souls. He discussed some deep issues of the human psyche. And he did that before psychology was, quote unquote, a thing. right? So he brought a very interesting notions, psychological notions that was not even introduced to our understanding, science, and culture many centuries later. So, in this, back to the preface, in this introduction, Joanna introduces, in addition to Jesus, she introduced just a few of very well-known contributors to this field of study. So she starts by introduce Robert Assagioli. And who is this man, Assagioli? Well, he was the man responsible for bringing the idea, the notion of psychosynthesis, and how that means that from there you bring the ability to understand the cause of the various diseases that we suffer. Right. Another one, and this one, it's very close to my heart because not only in the theoretical field, I work with his concepts on day to day in my professional life. So references to Abraham Maslow is found when you go to school, when you study this book, Jesus in Our Days, when you study many other books by Joanna de Angelis, when you look into studies of psychology. But it really teaches to us, to all of us, because he is in his work, he brought to us the well-known, right, pyramid, and I'm making the pyramid with my hands, of a hierarchy of needs. And he discovered the also the psychology of being, and Maslow paved the way for the profound understanding of the psychogenesis of the diseases that damage our human, our personality. So as I mentioned before, I love him to death. When you talk about the day-to-day professional activities, you start to really link what he brought to us in a very interesting way, because at a different uh, discussion, we look at the lower level, the hierarchy of needs, as very material needs, right? And then as you grow up and you satisfy your most basic needs, you start to look at other types of needs, your intellectual needs, your emotional needs, your spiritual needs, and with that, you can start to talk about humanity in our different sets of needs as we start to evolve. So this is super interesting. She continues to talk about Stanislav Grof. And who is Stanislav Grof? Grof is the founding member of the transpersonal psychology. He linked the mind, the notion of the mind, with the idea of a brain, and he confronts, I love it, the idea of immortal being, right, as the agent of all of our psychopathology. Oh, so Maslow talks about how we go from a lower, right, the lower, more material needs to intellectual, emotional, spiritual. Well, Groff talks about stop that. You also have these. This identity of yourself or as an immortal soul, an immortal being, and that with that notion of immortality, the notion of life after life, then we start to link current psychopathologies with previous lives potentially. Jonah DeAngelis ends this introduction here with also touching upon Sigmund Freud, Melanie Klein, and Carl Johnson, all Freudian, who propose treatments who propose therapy for those, for example, with schizophrenia through beautiful work that contain a, a strong component of love, charity, forgiveness, even though those are not religious scholars themselves. So, what I find it super, super interesting here is to see how many different scholars have come to similar conclusions as what we find in the works by Joanna the Angels regarding Jesus' teachings. So for me, what they bring to us is the notion of, as Groff introduced that from a scientific perspective, but the notion of our own immortality, right? We are more than this. We're more than this body, and so from that perspective, we come to terms that spirituality and also psychology are introduced to us closer and closer together. And I really love the fact, and I would like to note here that those contributors are in fact very well integrated. Their contributions are very well integrated with our values, our foundational beliefs, and that again, that they place the soul, right, our soul, as the basis of all human phenomena. So, from that perspective, without a spiritual view of our physical existence, life itself remains without sense or meaning, right? So, with that, let's wrap up our talk today by giving a little bit of a discussion on this ultimate reality that Jesus brings to us and that Joanna de Angelis talks in the preface of her book. Well, first of all, she brings the fact, as we know from his teachings, that is so important for us to recognize first and foremost is that Jesus was one with God, right? So that complete connection with God is important for us to note. Jesus manifested God every step of the way. He he invited everyone who listened to him to seek what he calls that ultimate reality, which he labels the kingdom of heaven, right? And Jesus brings to us the fact that reality, that ultimate reality, that synchronicity, that complete oneness with God lies within each and every one of us. This is so important for us. Um, we can say that we are God, well, lowercase g, right? We are God, all of us. We are all co creators of our reality. And the closer we are with our ultimate creator, we bring that reality, that kingdom of heaven inside of us. So, his proposal, as I put on the screen for assessing all values, and we're talking here about material values. We're not saying no, 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 don't live a material life. No, we have a very specific material values as well, spiritual values, and as we, as proposed by Jesus, take the step, have the courage to evaluate, to assess all that we bring with us, all of our concepts, all of our values, the basis of how we live. This is really a trigger. This is really an opportunity for us to have that mental awakening regarding life. right? It is a great opportunity for us to do that in an environment, in an atmosphere of harmony, an atmosphere of peace, right? And we start to really, this is awesome, to really underscore the difference between the limit of my own ability and what is the existential circumstances surrounding me. So that access, right, when we align our deep self with our ego, our inner reality with our reality. So it's important that I just have a few more minutes before we close today's topic, but what I'd like to bring is the fact that, and Joanna asserts here in her book, is the fact that Jesus spoke with such simplicity. So, who was his audience? Well, we call it the masses, right? We call it even the ignorant masses. And by that, I mean, he was not talking about the doctors of the law. He was not talking to the rabbis or those well educated in the elite. He talked to everyone with or without a formal education. So, and he touched both educated or non-educated with his powerful message. And how did he do this? He was this amazing storyteller, and if you think about it, it is indeed a very difficult art form to be that storyteller. And I can just think about it. If I am a storyteller, think in terms of the most interesting storytellers of our times are those people that do movies, right? That create scripts for movies, or those who create a choreography for a video, or ballet, or those who even are, let's say, comedians telling a short story in the mic, one tip at a time. And why do I bring that? Is the fact that those stories can often uh, as funny or impactful, etc. But they just, no, I don't know that I like to hear that. You're not being very universal. And Jesus, in his amazing ability as a storyteller, he touched everyone, right? As difficult some messages were indeed, he touched everyone 2000 years ago, and he continues to touch everyone today. So he was an excellent storyteller, and he was also a poet. He brought such a strong imagery, right? With his words, those images that are rich in color, rich in meaning. And because of that, he continued in the oral tradition to bring those stories over and over again. And led to what we're now trying to tell you today, which is the timelessness of his teachings. So one example, as I do close, is the fact that he brought the Sermon of the Mount, and that I don't know if you're familiar with the Bible, with the text or the Sermon of the Mount, but in the Sermon of the Mount, which I highly recommend you take some time to read, but in that he challenged us, and at the time a revolutionary challenge, a revolutionary way of looking at life. What did he do? He challenged us to live a life of nonviolence. So much so that later on, many centuries later, Gandhi, with his proposal of nonviolence, he references the Sermon of the Mount, right? He mentions to us, if you take everything out and leave the Sermon on the Mount, you have preserved Jesus' teachings. And to me, that is a great example for us to look at this freshness and strength, courageous and revolutionary message found there, because it is really a guidepost for how we should deal with um, inequity. We can deal with oppression. We can deal with those things that are deeply disturbing, but with love and nonviolence. So, with that, I say we desperately, desperately need Jesus outside of the cross, as Joanna mentions earlier in the book. And we do that because when he leaves the cross, he's no longer crucified. He now becomes our friend, our partner, our therapist. So here is my invitation for you to embark in this series of discussions in the next several weeks, and we together get to savor the words found in this book. Thank you so very much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and see you next week. Bye bye.